And then we also had these great big huge stadium lights in the yard because we'd work horses. Me and my mom showed horses competitively. So you work a horse at night so you don't overheat them because they don't really sweat as well as we do and stuff like that. So they're working hard, they can pass out. And we also had the like trails cut into the woods for four-wheeling and horseback riding and that kind of stuff. So this whole first year, this little stuff starts happening. We owned a camper at the lake. It's about a half hour away. I worked at this time. I was 16. It's closing at McDonald's. So I come down our big long driveway. And so it's like 11:30 at night. I call my mom and I say, hey, I'm not going to come up to the lake tonight. It's 4th of July weekend, but it's too late. I'm tired. I've already missed the fireworks. I'll just come up the next day. So I get home. We have Sonny. He was a Labradoodle. He's like 130 pounds, 120 pounds. Bailey is like a beagle mutt. He's like 40 pounds. And then Clarice is still alive to this day. And she's like a Yorkie poo. She's tiny.
I don't know how she's alive.
She's blind and got no teeth. Just looks like a mummy in the corner. So anyways, I get home and I'm in the kitchen. So I'm in one part of that U. And I'm trying to let the dogs out to go to the bathroom. And they won't come out. They won't go into the kitchen. And I don't really think it's anything weird. So I start going. I guess I kind of forgot one part. Sonny was my brother's service animal. So he was very trained not to push on you, not to do that kind of stuff. My brother has muscular dystrophy, so he doesn't do those kind of things. He's not like a normal dog. So I come in and Billy, I'm sorry, that I just popped up. So I come in, I try to let them out, and nobody will come into the kitchen. They won't even come to the kitchen. They're standing in like the hallway into the kitchen. I really don't think it's that weird at first. And I start going in and I get to the living room. I lay down. As I'm going through the house, all these dogs are like on top of me. The other two dogs, that's not too weird. They're lap dogs, whatever. But Sonny's like on top of me. And then when I lay down, the two little dogs get on top of me. And Sonny tries to get on top of me. He never did that kind of stuff. And I'm like, what are you doing? I push him off and he whimpers and he lays beside me. So like I said, we own just a small chunk of this massive woods. So way, way off on the other side of the woods, around this time I hear boom, boom, boom. And don't think it's nothing too weird because it's 4th of July weekend. We're the only house that has kids. Every other house is kind of like, older couples and stuff like that. But we're just like, okay, I'm just thinking somebody has their kid. I got to move the window. The light's getting me. Somebody's got their kids. They're out playing in the woods with fireworks, whatever, 4th of July weekend. So I don't think nothing of it. Another 10, 15 minutes pass. Boom, 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 a little closer. Another 10, 15 minutes. Boom, 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 a little closer. Another 10, 15 minutes. Boom, 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 a little closer. So then I call my buddy Nick. He didn't live on shared our woods, but he lived down the road and he'd go in the woods at night and he had like a fort built in there and everything like that. So I call him. I'm like, hey, are you out in the woods or anything? He's like, no, we're actually in Pennsylvania. I'm like, oh, okay, just making sure there's somebody out there lighting off fireworks. And then, I hear it a couple more times. And then finally, we had this big metal barn with all the horses and stuff. You just hear boom, boom, boom. Horses freak out. They actually break out of the pen and start running around in the pasture. And I'm frozen. And what's freaking me out more is the dogs aren't making any noise. So this, and Sonny is a guard dog. He saved my mom from a guy that tried to attack her and stuff like that. He's dead silent. And I'm in an all glass room. Whoever's out there, I don't want to stand up because I don't want them to see me. There's a gun cabinet in the next room. I'm just too scared. Another 10 or 15 minutes go by. There's like a Porsche, like 30 foot from the front door. Boom, boom, boom. I'm basically in tears at this point. Just I can't move. And the dogs aren't making any noise. So whoever's out there is only like 30 feet from me. At that moment, my aunt and uncle came down. They were living with us at the time. They came down in their convertible blaring music down this big long driveway. Whatever it was, took off. I came out in tears. They took me and the dogs into town. We're actually my grandma's house where I live now. So the next day, our buddy's dad, he was military police. He was detective, and he had a very accomplished career in law enforcement. He comes out with me, my dad, and he's like, whoever hit your barn had a sledgehammer and he hit it 4 times. And I'm like, no, he hit it 3 times. I remember, it's burnt in my head. I remember the boom. He's like, no, he hit it 4 times. And my dad's finally like, okay, why do you think he hit it 4 times? And he's like, there's 4 indentations. And the reason I think it's a sledgehammer is because how tall it is, like 8 foot off the ground. So, and that was weird. And now, later looking back, hindsight's 2020, but 4 indentations, 4 knuckles. Not 4 individual marks like he was thinking, like the hammer hit 4 times. It was more like 4 knuckles. And the Porsche had it too, where you could see this 4 bumps, like 4 indentations. So the small stuff keeps continuing, like horse feed going missing, just stuff get moved around, all that kind of stuff. And then around October, everything kind of stops. And then it doesn't start back up again until like May of next 2012. So this year, though, these piles get really, really big. And I mean, like, they have like car hoods and they have all this garbage like stacked up in them. And they're all over our fences. They're all over everything. They're in the corner of the yard. They're just kind of freestanding structures. And I showed competitive chickens. And that may sound funny. I don't know if anybody's watched Chicken People. But I had some birds that were pushing like $900 in value. But I also had $2 chickens too, don't get me wrong. I had egg chickens. But these really expensive chickens were basically in a coop that was electrified. You had to be a person to get into them and mess with these chickens and stuff like that. They started going missing. So, it's each bird can be upwards of $1,000 when it's going missing now. So now it's an issue. So we go over to the Amish country and we buy a red heeler. And this dog is just a monster. Her name was Lucy. She was a great dog. Couldn't really pet her or nothing like that. She was a work animal. But she would patrol the perimeter at night. And she would make all the animals go in the barn. And if you weren't supposed to be in the barn, she would make sure you stayed out. This dog was so mean. One day we came home. Me and my mom seen her. She was just covered in blood. And we couldn't find a scratch on her. We go into the woods, and there's 2 dead coyotes that she had killed. So just this awful, like, yeah. It always throws me back. I love chickens. But so she was like a really aggressive, high-strung dog. The problem was, so if like at night she would bark, chase a coon, raccoon, or possum, whatever out. The problem was if it stopped at the first tree to the woods from the pasture and ran up it, she would bark all night, and she would just sit there and bark and bark and bark. So we got pretty accustomed to have to go down and we have to knock the raccoon or the possum out of the tree it was in, so it could either go in the woods or she could get it. That was in her head. That's how she had to finish her job. So one night she's barking. It's real late. And we're like, me and Luke, my brother, we're like, okay. So we go to the garage, grab like a golf club and a baseball bat, whatever, just knock a raccoon out. And we start walking down there. And what's weird is she's kind of standing in front of one of those 4-wheeler trails near one of the big lights. So there's no trees there. It's just like a hole, like a void in the woods. We get about 30 feet away and I say, Luke, stop moving. And he'd already seen it. And Lucy's standing right there at the edge of darkness. There's these big chartreuse eyes just looking down at her. You can see this massive, massive figure. And it blinks real slow once. It blinks real slow twice. On the third blink, it's staring right at me and Luke. I'm shaking. I'm like, Luke, don't run, don't run. And that made it for about 5 feet, and we were back. We got to the house. We're in tears. My dad the whole time believed 100% this was a man So he's like, he gets the shotgun. He goes down there and he's standing right. Lucy's still standing right where she was. She hasn't moved an inch. There's nobody there right now though. So he's like, all right, you MFer. You've scared my kids. You've tortured us for 2 years. No, we're done with this. You're coming out now. I'm going to start shooting into the woods. Obviously, nobody comes out. He aims to the top of the trees. He shoots. That second, 10 foot past him, sounded like a buffalo was just tearing through the woods. Didn't stop. Me and Luke are on the outside listening, and Dad kind of fell backwards, ran back up to the house, and it was just all he'd say is, that's not a man. That's just not a man. And activity pretty much stopped. We never really talked about it for like 3 or 4 years. My mom ended up getting cancer that year. She's fine now. She's in remission. But, so life got, a lot more complicated. We had to sell the farm and everything like that. But that's kind of the short version. Yeah, Lucy's are such a good dog. But yeah, so that's that.
Well, that's a pretty wild story. And I think honestly, I've heard similar stories from people so many times that have so much activity over such a long period of time. And I don't know if this is the case for you. It sounded like it might have been, but I'll ask the question. In retrospect, looking back, do you think that there were even more things that you guys heard or maybe experienced that could have been attributed to Sasquatch that you didn't know at the time that maybe in retrospect now you say, that could have been?
So here's a weird one for you that we've talked about before. Me and my brothers were coon hunters. We'd go coon hunt at night and stuff like that. I don't know where everybody's from at home. Here in Ohio, you kind of hunt with them for lights at night and stuff like that. You know, you get your license or whatever. We never did in our own woods, and we never talked about why. None of us ever did. And it's one of those things, when we coon hunted a lot, and we wouldn't be in our own woods at night. We'd drive somewhere. We'd always drive somewhere. And it was just kind of a lot of there were a lot of weird small things that I think could be added up to that. And I didn't believe in Bigfoot till years after that. I was going to school, like we'll talk about in a minute. I was going to school to be a biologist, and biologists don't believe in Bigfoot. You know, that's not true now, but when I was going to school, I was getting ready to go to college for it and stuff like that, that was the mindset. You know, biologists don't believe in Bigfoot. I don't believe in Bigfoot. I don't know what I experienced. It wasn't Bigfoot. And it wasn't until years after, that I kind of started coming full circle. The comment made me laugh. Justin has beautiful hair. Thank you. No, so there was a lot, that was the big one that was really, really weird to us that kind of didn't make any sense till after. And then my adopted sister one time said that there was a guy. Sorry, my Wi-Fi is really rough. There's a guy walking through the field back and forth one day, and my dad went in there, couldn't find him. Corn was real tall. And there was just so yes, there was a lot of small things that I think could have been attributed looking back, how that always goes.
Yeah, I've asked that question before, and it gets people talking, and I've even done the same thing myself. There's things that I've witnessed or heard or even other people told me about that were happening on and around places that I lived as a kid. And I look back and I think, man, that could have been, or maybe it was. I don't know. Let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned going to school for biology. Do you think that, let's talk a little bit about that, what that process was like, what you went to school for, and does that help you in what you're doing now and looking at some of these subjects that we're talking about tonight?
Awesome. Yeah. So I was what's called, I went to school for fisheries biology. I was a fisheries technician. It's a field biologist. There's all these kind of subcategories and stuff like that. I say biologist, it's just the easiest way to explain it. So I went to school for that, specifically for fisheries. So I specialized in fish and amphibians. But I did endangered species surveys. I did eDNA stuff. Everybody loves talking about eDNA with the Bigfoot. I did that for a living. Endangered species habitat assessments, that kind of stuff. And I really do think, because we've gone through our show, and I really think that a lot more cryptids and the paranormal stuff is a lot more credible, I guess, than people want to get, because nature is so much weirder. We talk about the weird stuff that happens in nature all the time. We talked about the white bellbird, which is the loudest single animal on Earth, 124 decibels. Or was it? Yeah, 100. Was it 124 or 224?
I think 124.
124. So a jet engine's 125 taking off. A little deafen you and make you go blind if it talks in front of you. And to talk about some of these cryptids that have some of this powers, these little tiny guys that can literally make you go blind. That's literally, if you didn't know what a white bellbird was, and you see this little bird and it screamed at you, and then you went blind, that's a cryptid.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that helped kind of shape. It was weird. We had a guy. So I'm not sure if everybody at home is familiar with the caloritician. So there's a couple different types of caloritician. That's kind of like a group term. The one that I worked with was a guy that would go into an environment and he would say, okay, here's how many available calories are in this food chain. So we'd expect to see this much A predators, this much B predators, so on and so forth. So we'd go then and do the survey. And if we didn't find those things, that just shows that, hey, the food's there, the habitat's there. So there's something else wrong. So his job is very important for how we kind of judge systems and stuff like that. So one day we're talking in our shop at the lab, and we're talking about Bigfoot. And of course, he's one of those guys that, Bigfoot's just not real. What do you guys, you're wasting all of our time. I'm in a biology lab, we're wasting all of our time. I don't talk to this guy like ever. Because he's fully lab guy. We go out and we're field techs. So like 4 or 5 weeks later, he comes up to me and he hands me like a little stack of papers. And he's like, well, here's how many, if they're similar to a black bear in diet and they're about twice the size, here's how many that could survive in the continental US. And he had it all worked out. He did all the math. He figured it out. His low estimate was 15,000. His high estimate was 45,000. And I believe it's probably somewhere in the 25,000 range. I think they just have a really large home range. Like bobcats in Ohio here have a 300-mile square home range. So one bobcat occupies 300 square miles. So, and we know how rare it is to see bobcats, let alone, but so yeah, I do think that definitely shaped at least how I research things.
Oh, I'd say so. I'd say it changed perspectives over time.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about evidence. Let's talk about, I know you guys have done shows. I was looking back at your catalog about, I've talked to people who have claimed to have shot Bigfoot and killed Bigfoot. Yet we're sitting here and there's no bodies that I'm aware of. People say they may be hidden down in the Smithsonian bowels of the Smithsonian somewhere, but as far as we know, there's no bodies, right? So what do you think that is? If we're talking 15 to 45,000 of these things, right? And you're saying the estimate, I think if they are real at all, if you believe any of this at all, there's probably about 25,000 of them across the continental United States. That's a fairly big number, but we haven't proven the species. There's really not a ton of evidence out there, and we can even disagree about that if you want, to prove that these things are real, right? So where's the body? Why haven't people who have claimed to have shot these things brought them in? That's always the question I go to. If you shot these things, and I know one guy in particular has claimed to have shot at least 8 of them. I'm trying to get him on the show.
That'd be
right?
awesome.
I think
Yeah, it would be awesome. He's like the gunslinging Bigfoot slayer. But, if he's killed 7 or 8 of these things and hasn't produced a body, either he's 100% full of shit, or he's doing something with the bodies, or he's just making it all up, right? So I asked the question, why do you think it is that we don't have a body? These things aren't a proven species as we sit here today. And what do you think about the evidence that's out there in the zeitgeist now? Is there anything that sticks out to you, Jay or Justin or both, that has really, if you haven't had an experience of your own, like I haven't, and many people that are going to hear and watch this haven't, if you hadn't had that experience yourself, what is it out there in the zeitgeist that you can point to and say, I believe this is definitive evidence that they're real?
So, like I said, I did endangered species surveys. So I literally looked for the animals that were incredibly rare that we had documented. It was extremely hard to find. Some, we'd be out 4 or 5 weeks. We do an eDNA survey, so we knew their DNA was present. Greg, you better not be talking to me. But no, sorry. So we know that their DNA was present in the system, and we'd spend weeks and weeks and weeks and couldn't find them. I mean, we'd be out, sometimes, 12, 13 hours a day doing these surveys and couldn't find them, and we know they're there. For somebody that's either not a believer or kind of halfway on the fence about it, my 2 biggest things, and the DNA science just isn't there yet. And there's people working on it and stuff like that, and it's just my opinion. Everything I say is my opinion. The DNA stuff for Sasquatch right now does not matter until you have a confirmed specimen, because you're just going to have unknown samples, human contaminant. That's what it's going to keep bouncing back as until you have a reference sample. So it just doesn't happen until literally we have one we can prop up, take a sample of. It doesn't have to be dead, but we need one and we can be like, that's a Bigfoot. Here's some hair. Here's some blood. The 2 big things I would say are just the number of people. The sheer number of people here in the U.S. that see him every year. I believe last time we kind of talked about it was like around 3,000-ish a year in the continental U.S. Let's say 98% of those people are lying,
or just misiding,
or whatever. It's all like you can explain 98% of it away. That's still 60 sightings a year that are completely unexplainable by other means, whether mis-ID, lying, somebody seen a trash can and thought it was a Bigfoot in the dark. All that stuff.
Right.
So that's a big number. The second really big thing for me is if you look at websites like the BFRO or whatever, anybody that tracks Sasquatch encounters, There is an exciting DNA. Oh yeah, awesome. So anybody that tracks like the dates of Sasquatch encounters, what's really cool is a lot of them are seasonal. Which to me, if I was looking for, let's say, a large mammal, most large mammals have to move around to maintain food sources. I'm not saying migration because of cold. Bigfoot living in Alaska can do just as fine as they could do in Ohio, as just fine as they could do in Tennessee, I'm sure. Just like a grizzly bear or a black bear, they can, or like us, you can be transplanted pretty much everywhere. They move, in my opinion, due to food sources. You keep moving, especially when you're big. You don't want to completely exhaust your area. So we see in these sighting records, there's a lot of these areas that are seasonal. Which to me, if you replace the word or Bigfoot with the word elk, I'd be like, that makes 100% sense.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. I would believe that. It's if you get rid of a lot of these studies, you remove the word Bigfoot and put some other large mammal, like, it makes sense. It makes sense. So from the outside looking in, those are the two I would say that are definitive. That we know that people report sightings, and we know the dates they report them. So it's very hard for people in certain areas to be reporting those date ranges commonly. As far as the bodies go, we did a couple episodes on it. So, and I always forget the county, but there's a grizzly bear researcher in Alaska. He lives in the county in Alaska with the most grizzly bears on the planet. It's like it's some big stupid number. It's like 4,000 or 5,000 grizzly bears in this one county. They're literally everywhere. He has only ever found 3 dead ones in 30 years. One of them had a radio collar on it. And he thinks that, so it's like 3,000 animals. He thinks about 10% of the population dies a year due to fighting and starvation and stuff like that. Old age, So that means there's 300 grizzly bears out in this one county in Alaska dying every year that he is looking for and cannot find. So now if you take that number, like we said, 25,000, and you really spread them out, and they're smart and they're secretive and everything like that, you're not going to find, like, the odds game of you running into a carcass is extremely hard. And stuff like grizzly bears, so predators, grizzly bears, wolves, and mountain lions, they normally don't just die. Even if they're shot and whatever, they'll go pick a hole somewhere, and they will crawl because they don't want to be picked to death by scavengers. Like coyotes and stuff like that will take advantage of animals that are still alive, they're very weak. And that's a very, very bad, that's a sucky way to die.
Yeah.
If you're this big grizzly bear, or you're this big mountain lion, or you're this big wolf, and you're mortally wounded, or you're close to death from old age, you're going to find some crack or crevice somewhere and shove yourself in so deep so you can die peacefully. So that's my opinion why we don't find a lot of these bodies. As far as people shooting them, I don't know. I have, thoughts whether they're very, it matters really how smart you want to put a Sasquatch. And we don't know. I feel like mine was fairly intelligent, but that's an opinion. If they're smart enough to where they bury their dead, or they know they don't want to get caught, so it's more of a survival tactic to make sure you hide your dead. That could be. I don't think it necessarily has to be, though. There's just so few of them over such a, find. I know it's 25,000, like a lot of for everybody at home. If you couldn't find 25,000 African elephants on the U.S. continent, if you just couldn't. If they're spread out and they're moving and everything, like, they're walking around fine, finding 25,000 of any large mammal spread over the continent is a hard thing to do. So I had a friend, I share this story a lot. She was a big cat researcher out in like Nevada. She tagged a mountain lion once. She got it with a trank dart, put a collar on its neck, a radio collar, and then released it. And then she was supposed to go back in like 30 or 40 days, reweigh it, do all this stuff, and recatch it. This cat has a radio collar on it. She knows exactly where this cat is. Never sees it again. Can't find it. Can't get close to it. It's always just out of reach. So what that cat learned is it didn't want to get shot again. Obviously, that whole experience wasn't very pleasant. So it did everything in its power to avoid her. She would be like 25 or 30 feet away from this thing and could never see it again. So if you want to say Sasquatch is a little smarter than a big cat, which I think is fair, and they don't want to be found, that's why you see them on accident. You see the ones that don't care. There's these accidental run-ins or whatever, or these ones where they're just kind of like we have here in Hocking Hills and stuff like that in Ohio. We have the dumpster Bigfoots. We have these guys that are seen getting in and out of getting food. Why wouldn't you? I like pizza.
You do? I do too.
Like, don't you attack me on
I'm
here.
not gonna.
Yeah, if you can't go out and order a pizza, you can certainly get one out of a dumpster. There's a couple of things popping up on. I want to say hi to from Scotland. Do we have these creatures in Scotland? Please tell me no. Some people would say yes. I've had Irish Bigfoot researchers on who claim that they're in Ireland, but I caught a lot of crap for that show. And a lot of people say they're not in the UK. I've had people on from the UK who have claimed to have had encounters with what couldn't be anything, in my opinion, other than a Sasquatch. So I'm going to say possibly in Scotland and leave it at that. There's a question here for Jay, it looks like. I'd like to hear from Jay.
gosh.
What kind of soft disclosure is Bigfoot involved with? That sounds like a loaded question, Jay.
It definitely does. I don't know if Bigfoot's involved with any soft disclosure, but I bet the movie Harry and the Hendersons is a soft disclosure form in Hollywood.
I think you might be right.
Get that Bigfoot idea out there that he's just
Make it goofy.
These big goofy animals that aren't that smart. They're just out there fooling around. They play it in such a fun, lighthearted way that this can't be real. It's this big goofy animal. We would have found one by now. But I think in reality, it's a lot more intelligent than old Harry. And, it kind of, you get the entertainment from seeing Bigfoot on the big screen without actually getting the fire to go out in the woods and experience it yourself. You already got the full thing from the movie. So I don't know.
Or even the Slim Jim commercials, right? It wasn't that the Slim Jim that did the.
It's a Jack Link's beef jerky. Yeah, messing with Sasquatch.
Well, speaking of laughable, let's dive into a little bit of something that I have a difficult time with, honestly, in researching this and frankly even documenting a lot of stories is some of the more fantastical aspects of things. And I'll be honest with you guys, and I'm sitting on an episode now that I don't know that will ever see the light of day, but I interviewed this guy a couple of weeks ago, and it starts off with a relatively what seems to be straightforward, if there is such a thing, about seeing a big 800-pound ape in the woods story, but it goes into a whole different area that, well, let's just say this. It involves sex with a Sasquatch, and I'll leave it at that, right? Now, I'll be honest with you. This guy was either 100% batshit crazy, or he really had this experience, or none of it happened at all, and it all happened to him in his mind. But he was very, very serious about the story that he told me. And I'm wrestling with the fact of how people are going to perceive this if I put it out there, because it is a very fantastical story that he tells about having an encounter with a female Sasquatch. I didn't know this was really a thing, honestly, and I had somebody reach out to me a couple of months ago who has a book out called The Sensual Sasquatch, and it is an entire book that documents these encounters that people have where they witness a sensual thing going on between Sasquatches, or they get involved. And we're not gonna go down that entire rabbit hole, but I bring that up to say there's a lot of fantastical stories out there, and I know you guys have touched on this. And it goes hand in hand with maybe the lack of evidence and why these things aren't proven as a species. There's a lot of people out there who believe that these things are more than just a flesh and blood creature. They're interdimensional beings. They're coming and going in and out of our reality. There may be an alien connection to Bigfoot. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk a little bit about the weirder stories, some of the things that maybe you guys have documented or heard, and how do you approach that as an investigator and a researcher yourself when people have these sort of out there fantastical stories? How do you compartmentalize that, and what do you do with that as a researcher when you hear those kind of stories?
Do you want to take it first?
Well, when you say those kind of stories, are we sticking to just like the sensual Sasquatch stories? Or
I think he means like the woo
in general.
Let's talk about the woo. And I brought that up because it happened to me recently, and it's probably one of the wildest stories that I've ever heard. It's not necessarily woo at all, right? It's a very
right.
When you get down to the basics of life, it's one of the most basic things that happens. But people would look at that and say that is an absolutely crazy story. There's no way that happened. But where do you draw the line when it is somebody's experience, whether it's I saw this thing coming off of a UFO or she came into my tent and we had relations? It all sort of goes hand in hand with in my opinion, when people are having these experiences and sharing them on shows like ours, what do you do with that as an investigator? Do you put that out there for people to hear? Do you say, I believe this guy, I don't believe this guy? How do you guys handle that when you hear those fantastical type stories?
So personally, I will never tell anybody, and you're not the other, but I would never tell anybody that they didn't have their experience, because if you would have asked me even 2 years after my experience, Bigfoot's not real. None of it's real. And I had an experience. So let alone, later on and stuff. And I think some of it is very fantastical, but the world is very fantastical in aspects.
Yeah, that's true.
So as far as the relations stuff, like the Native Americans have all kinds of stories, and not just the Native Americans, other cultures from around the world have these stories of these Sasquatch or rock giants, whatever you want to like. Every culture has its own words for it. Taking men, women, for reproductive, behaviors. If you believe Sasquatch is a primate, primates are notorious for taking other species, whether they can reproduce with them or not, for pleasure. It's just a primate thing. And that goes from humans down to gibbons. It's everybody. And it is, so why would if we believe Sasquatch is maybe a primate, why would we exclude them from that behavior? They definitely could be a lot more probably gentle than a chimpanzee could. But everybody loves that video of, and I won't go too detailed, but the chimpanzee and the frog at the zoo. It literally catches this frog and it uses it.
Yeah.
The frog did not survive.
Probably not.
No, I'll tell you it didn't. But no, the woo, I mean, it happens.
Yeah. It's part of the puzzle you can't just exclude ever. And I'd say it comes down to the individual you're talking to when we kind of decide, are we going to publish this, or are we even going to talk to this guy or interview him or something? But it just kind of comes down to that individual telling the story, and whether or not, because you kind of get a vibe from people, whether or not they're telling you an authentic story, or they're making it fantastical, or just, over elaborating on certain things, or they're completely making it up altogether. You can usually kind of get a feel for each person in which the way they tell the story.
100%. So let's say you are getting assaulted by a Sasquatch like that. I wouldn't be coming out straightforward and just telling everybody about it. I wouldn't be super open about it. It would be a very hard thing to speak about. So if X person is really wanting to tell everybody about this stuff, and we run into people, we do the Bigfoot conferences, you do the Bigfoot conferences. You run into people that they just go there. Literally, our first Bigfoot conference ever was Ohio Bigfoot 2 years ago, as vendors and stuff like that. We had one guy come straight in. Literally, he came in. He did not look comfortable. He did not want to be there. And we were kind of the first table by the door. And he walked over and he's like, just kind of like, you guys know about this Bigfoot stuff, right? We're like, yeah, yeah, we do. I had my own encounter and stuff like, we did that kind of talk. He was not comfortable. He's like, I kind of had these two strange things happen. And if anybody here knows, kind of what happened. And he goes through it, and he's from, I don't know if you ever heard of Egypt Valley, Ohio. So for like the Ohio Bigfoot researchers, it's kind of like the Mecca. It has just constant weird. It's a very hard valley to do anything in. It's one of the last like really, really like forested ancient wood of Ohio. But it's full of the paranormal and Sasquatch. So he's like, I had this thing. I was out turkey hunting and I was on the ridge, and I heard a turkey, what I thought, over the ridge making all kinds of noise. So I tried getting up to flip over this ridge, and this, he said like a cow ran at me, but I couldn't hear it. It was just throwing stuff. Couldn't see it. Oh, sorry, not hear it. Couldn't see it. Just throwing stuff and like running at me. And then it stopped like 10 foot away, and I was like fetal position, and then it would back up, and then a couple of minutes later do it again. And he's like, I was so scared. I just, I ran away and all this stuff. And he's like, has anybody had any of that? And I'm like, yeah, Hocking Hills is famous for bluff charges. That's in the Hocking Hills, Ohio. It's not that far from it. It's known for having those type of encounters. These very scary, intimidating encounters, but nobody really gets hurt. But, it really sucks to be there when there's an animal you really can't see running at you.
Yeah, shaking the ground.
Yeah. And he just went, okay, is there any laws about shooting one? And I'm like, not in this state.
Yeah.
And then he walked right out the door.
And he also said, remember that he had that deer skull.
Oh, shoved in the ground upside down.
Upside down. Like
the next day he came back and it was like a deer skull shoved in the ground upside down. But he was uncomfortable the whole time. The second we told him, yeah, people kind of had similar experiences, he turned around and walked right out the door. He wanted nothing on it. Oh, what do we got? But yeah, not calling BS, but when you hear it does the subject no favors. It can be done in a polite manner, but I feel it needs to be done, especially if it's completely ridiculous. Just yeah. So there's those other, we have those other ones that just they want to come up, and this is my encounter, and the CIA got involved, and I was poured away in black helicopters, and it's like, no, you would be dead. Like if like the CIA got involved with anything you did, we wouldn't be talking here about it right now. So it is a hard line for a podcaster, or any of this, because people come to you, and some of these people, like, well, I won't pick on Greg too much, he's in here, but I never knew he had an encounter, and he never knew I had an encounter. We live 5 houses away from each other, and I had to get him a little drunk, talk about it. Love you, Greg. But yeah, it's a hard line to walk, and I, like Jay said, I really think it's when you talk to that person, you get, if it's a really like horrible encounter and they're super excited to talk about it, that's one of my big red flags personally. If it's a really horrible encounter and it's like pulling teeth, that to me gives it more, they don't want to talk about it. It bothers them. And it should, if you had forced relations with a Sasquatch, that would bother me very deeply. I don't know if I'd talk about it.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be sharing that.
Did you have one, Jay? You're looking very uncomfortable.
Forest relations? Is
Forest.
That what you call it? Yeah. I don't think so.
Blocked it out.
Yeah, it's been blocked out. If I had, it's gone. I can't. It's not there enough to share it, I guess.
I think that was a great answer. I appreciate that. And I too, like you, I don't exclude anything on the show. I've done that since day one. People's experiences are their experiences. I've had some really wild stories on the show. 300 plus episodes of the show in, it's bound to happen. And I don't discredit and I don't necessarily discount, because I say it all the time. I don't have anybody on the show that doesn't believe that they had the experience that they share. It might have all happened in their mind, but they believe that it's true. And I believe that even if it didn't happen to them, or it may not have happened exactly like they share it, there's something to be gleaned from everybody's encounter. It's all data. We put that data in the hopper, and, we may pull it out 6 years from now and say, I've talked to 5 people that have now had this exact same experience. Maybe there's a there, and we start drawing those correlations. That's one of the things that when I had the guy on from the Bigfoot mapping project, that's what he's doing. He's starting to see patterns and put together, like you were talking about, these migration patterns of maybe it's just a food migration, and it may not be as big as when you say migrate, they think thousands of miles. Maybe it's only a couple of 100 square miles, but when you start putting all that data together, you can pull that back out, extrapolate it out, and say, okay, now we know that these things are moving in this area at this time, and it's all data. That's really all we have at the end of the day, is as much data as we can gather. And if it is a little crazy, I don't know about the alien connection to Bigfoot. That's one of those things that people have talked about. And I used to separate that on the show. People would say, well, I had this experience with Bigfoot. Anything else weird? Well, there was these UFOs, these strange lights in the woods. And I used to completely separate those if they weren't happening at the same time. If they didn't see a Bigfoot stepping off of a UFO, I didn't really put those two together. And then sometimes they start telling the stories, and there does seem to be this correlation between those things. I don't think that, I've said it on the show before, I don't think that aliens are dropping Bigfoot off to, like you take your dog out to the dog park bathroom and they're picking them up later. But there may be some sort of connection globally or on a bigger scale. It may not be exactly what people think when you're talking about connections, in that these things are their pets or whatever. But I think ultimately, I know everything is connected across the board, whether it's ghostly stuff, it's, Bigfoot, aliens, whatever you want to talk about. I want to get into a couple of other little things here that I know you guys have talked about on your show, and I've talked about it here too, is dogman. How many dogman stories have you guys heard? What are your thoughts on dogman? We can even talk about some of the other cryptids before we get out of here. I've always had a really hard time with dogman because it's never really made sense to me. A big giant ape in North America, okay, I can get behind that, right? But this big giant dog-like creature that people are seeing, I used to think it was a misidentification. Now I'm not so sure. We've even talked about on the show before, famously with the guys from the Kentucky X-Files. Denny's thinking it may be kangaroos. I've read things where people, we've got wild kangaroos here in America, and if you get into some of these stories and you look at the circumstances, it could be one of these big ass kangaroos that people are running into in the woods. So what say you on dogman in particular?
Before we step into the dogman, I do want to say something about the kangaroos.
Yeah.
Is that the UK is having a problem right now with wallabies establishing like those colonies and breeding colonies here. We're in Ohio, but we're close to Michigan. There is a population of emus that took hold. Wild emus. I maybe ain't seen an emu. They're a smaller cousin of the ostrich. They're kind of furry though. They're like 5.5, 6 foot tall. If you didn't know what that was, and you've seen that out there, that's a dinosaur. I mean, it is a dinosaur essentially, and they're mean. They're coming at you. But I just wanted to say that, like the kangaroo, like there are animals that are establishing here in the U.S. that aren't maybe not native or not. It happens.
Well, was a kangaroo farm, 25 miles from here?
Yeah, and people keep still to this day see kangaroos.
Yeah,
and it's been closed for years.
Yeah,
and they're probably because there's some kangaroos loose still or offspring.
Right. Yeah.
Do you want to tackle dogman first?
Well, I think dogman falls similarly to like the Bigfoot phenomena, where there might not just be one type of Bigfoot. And there might not just be one type of dogman. And then, like you were saying, there could be misidentification of another animal. Like we just did an episode recently on hyenas in the United States and the history of that. If typically we don't expect them to be here or imagine them even being here in our backyard, but there's a very good possibility they could be. There's some that just roam around it.
Well, they were native.
Exactly.
And biologists can't explain why they went extinct. They were doing so well. And they probably just didn't go extinct.
They're probably just still there. So yeah. If you see like a hyena looking thing, you might think that's a dogman.
I may rather the dogman,
right,
than a hyena.
And just there's the supernatural side to it, which anyone can get into, whether it be a curse or an interdimensional being or anything else, something transforming into a dogman. Just the stuff you kind of see in TV and movies or reading books. I mean, and not to say that stuff couldn't be possible at all, because I think we both agree nothing's impossible in this world. Yeah. And with what people are doing behind the scenes
hopefully they could hear that.
Yeah, anything could be possible. But as far as like just being a flesh and blood like dogman like creature, I mean, I guess that's more your wheelhouse.
So, I'm with you. And we talked about this with Bigfoot and stuff like that. And we kind of skipped over the alien thing. But there's so many different types of encounters. And all I can say with my personal experience is I fully felt it was flesh and blood. It wanted the chickens. It wanted horse feed. Those are flesh needs. It was scared of the gun. That's a flesh fear. But we've had these stories of dogman. Like, well, we did the Defiance dogman right down the road from us. Mm-hmm. That was literally a werewolf. And that's, dogman, werewolf, I guess could be interchangeable, but not really.
Right.
This thing literally had pieces of human clothes on it, and it looked like it was kind of wearing pants. And it beat a guy with a 2x4. It had these big claws and hit a guy with a 2x4. And that sounds crazy, right? There was plenty of witnesses for every one of its attacks. And some of the witnesses were cops. The mayor seen it attack somebody. It was this whole kind of thing. So it's kind of a weird story with really like, you look at it and you're like, that doesn't really make sense for anybody. It doesn't make sense for you. You're the fully spiritual dogman, the demonic dogman, the flesh and blood dogman, the werewolf. There's a lot of things that just you're looking at the story and like, if there wasn't all the witnesses, you'd probably throw literally the mayor and police officers that attacked. And I'm not messing up. That was a long time ago. We did that episode. But one of the ladies that attacked was in front of a cop car with the 2 cops sitting in it. And they sat there for a second, kind of like, what are we seeing? And then they got out and obviously they broke it up. The dogman ran away, attacked one of them. But I'm thinking with Jay that it's really hard to put them all in one basket.
Yeah.
And I do think some of it is mis-ID, and there's always that mis-ID. And there can even be mis-ID for these other cryptids. But dogman, like there's these weird things with them with Native American burial grounds. And like so everybody knows the Beast of Bray Road and that kind of stuff. You've seen digging in burial grounds. The one, what was it? The London, Ohio.
Yeah, there was
Dogman
London, Ohio Dogman.
was seen digging in a burial mound. The land between the lakes. That's really famous one. That whole area has a horrible history. So the Dogman does kind of have this, whether it's true or not, this kind of weird association with either death or destruction, whether they're like, if they're attracted to it, if they're a result of it. I don't know. I think I'm with Jay. It's just kind of hard to lump them in because there's stories the Dogman getting shot point blank and then just kind of smiling at you. And then there's stories where they kill, people kill them with an axe.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you can always go down that avenue of like government experimentation, hybrid human beings, like with other animals. But I mean, I entertain that because I think it's very well could be possible, but how are you going to even explain that away to anybody? Like, if you admit like that's actually happening, that's just kind of opens up this whole other world of what's really going on behind the scenes in certain areas when it comes to this stuff. But so I'm hoping that's not actually what it is people are seeing, but I can't hold that out as saying like that's not happening at all. So,
but then the Miss ID thing too. I think a lot of this stuff, like you said, yourself with the kangaroos and stuff like that. A kangaroo is a weird looking animal. It just is plain. Red kangaroos and gray kangaroos are quite large. They can be aggressive. They can be friendly. They very German Shepherd. Some of the dogmen describe very German Shepherd head. Kangaroos have a very German Shepherd head. They stand up. They crawl on all fours. They're incredibly fast.
And have you ever seen the ones that are just jacked? Like
they're jacked. They'll destroy you.
They got pecs, shoulders, biceps. Like I could see that being a man-like body.
And I have to shout out our buddies, the Coon Hunting Confidentials. They did this. They came on our show and talked about Dogman as a raccoon man. They're the first ones, and it's out now, but this was a while ago. And I did research for them. There was a prehistoric raccoon species here in North America that did get to be about 5.5 feet tall. So have you seen a raccoon that was 5.5 feet tall?
Screw that.
And everybody hasn't personally experienced like a wild raccoon, not your little city raccoons, like an actual raccoon. They are evil.
And what I would liked about their theory too was, dogs, their dogs' hands or paws or whatever. Raccoons have like
they have thumbs.
They're like little human hands. They grab stuff. They carry stuff off. So as 5-6 foot tall raccoon standing up using its hands. Yeah, that's a dog man. I would bet, raccoon man just doesn't. You don't really hear that too often.
Too many syllables.
Yeah, it's too hard to say. Dog man, much better.
Dog man too.
Right, it's simple.
Yeah, we like to keep it simple. I know I've heard some rattlings around recently about, I think Melba Ketchum's back on the scene and maybe even trying to do some dogman DNA testing. I've invited her on the show a couple of times and she tells me she's not doing podcast interviews. And then I see she's doing 3 podcasts in a week. So I don't know if it's something with me and my show. I don't know what it is, but it is what it is. But I know there's a lot of talk around DNA. I had Doug Highcheck on last week. We were talking about Legend Meet Science too. And we were talking about eDNA and doing some DNA testing on hair and some other things. And DNA in and of itself sounds great in my opinion, but it's a lot harder, I think, than most people realize to actually collect a real DNA sample. And then I think you touched on it earlier, Justin. Sometimes you do DNA and you just end up with this sample that nobody knows what the hell it is. And where do you go from there when it comes to DNA, right?
So, and this is my opinion, but I collected DNA for a living for a little bit. DNA is extremely hard to collect and keep from distorting. We were on such high timers, literally like we had to get it into the lab within 4 to 5 hours of harvest. Its eDNA is mostly harvested from water. It's such a pain.
You have to keep it on ice too,
yeah,
right?
Oh yeah, it's horrible to do. So here's the thing is that if you're in the camp, and this is all of my opinion, I always just like to put that caveat out there so nobody roasts me. If you are of the opinion that Sasquatch is very human related, as in, very close ancestor, relative, whatever you want to put it, you're going to get a test that comes back from hair or blood or whatever, every time that says human contaminant or unknown species. Because if they're that close related and there's no one to compare it to, so most of these DNA sequencing labs need a comparative sample. There's this thing called, we talked about it on an episode, the ARC base. I think it's the ARC base. And they pretty much have every DNA sample. It's super expensive to get a DNA, get your DNA ran, but most likely if it's not present in there, it's probably not present or hasn't been fully documented or recorded, so it's, it's kind of the catch-all end all. But most DNA tests are very selective. Like if let's say you're doing a test for a mammal here in Ohio, most of your DNA tests aren't going to show any non-Ohio mammals. So let's say you have hair of a kangaroo. If you have hair of a kangaroo and you just do it compared to Ohio mammals, you're going to have an unknown animal. It's not unknown to the DNA database. It's unknown to the criteria that you put forward. So it doesn't fit that. So that's the other kind of problem. And I won't talk too much about the story because it's still going on. There's a biologist in a state in the South U.S. that he thinks he discovered a new species of salamanders. They're actually a wild population of pet store axolotls. Anybody hasn't seen axolotls at home? They're this little funny salamander fish that have the gills on their head. All kinds of colors. The wild ones are pretty much poop brown. So all these rainbow colored ones are all, store fish. Not fish, salamanders, store salamanders. But he did DNA tests for his state, and he kept bouncing back unknown animal. But axolotls are native to Mexico, not native to the U.S. So if he were to expand his search criteria out a little bit more, he would get a hit back, DNA known. And like I said earlier, the other thing is, it's collecting DNA is great. Sorry, before I move on to that, you can contaminate the sample very, very easily if you believe it's human related. So, excuse me, all these people and I'm not bashing anybody because this is a very, you got to go, it's a hard thing to do, collect DNA. If you think it's human related and you see a piece of hair sitting way over there, you can't get close to it. You have to glove up, sanitize. Literally, we'd have these DNA collection kits that have the stuff to sanitize wrapped inside of other stuff, and then the other stuff was in sealed packages. It's a whole process to gear up to even collect this DNA. If you get too close and breathe on that sample, that's it. It's going to come back human contaminant. 90% of the time, if we're testing for salamanders, fish, whatever, doesn't really matter. We're going to find human DNA. We're not looking for that kind of stuff. If you're looking for a primate or a higher level primate, you really don't want to contaminate it. So that's kind of the other big problem. But the DNA should be collected because, in my opinion, what could happen one day if you get a body or a live one, now all of these analog samples can be retested, and we have a much, much better understanding of the population, diversity, all this, basically, there's like 24,000 hair samples in the U.S. or whatever the number is. Then you got an idea. Okay, we went back, and 14,000 of them are real. 14,000 people or 14,000 samples are actually real. And then collection method is another really important thing. Like you normally have one team do it all. Like when we would do it, we would do whole river watersheds. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of river watershed. The reason you do that is you get rid of variables. Me and you would collect DNA very differently. And that's fine, but we can't put our samples in the same study because you did yours one way, I did mine one way. It just doesn't work. Science, you need to get rid of every variable possible. So if there's only 3 guys, the crew's normally 3 people, and they're the ones collecting all the DNA, you get rid of that variable. They're the ones that did it all. So, the DNA is just a really difficult thing. So let's say when we collect it in the morning, we had to get it to the lab. Well, first we had to filter it on a micron mesh. And micron is it was 0.5 microns wide. It's actually made of glass. Anybody ever seen ever at home, like the makeup pads your mom or your wife or whatever uses? It feels like that. It is made of glass shards. You can flex it and everything like that. So it's only 0.5 microns wide or something like that. It pretty much it gets everything else out but the DNA. So what you're left for is just DNA fragments. So it's just hard to do. And especially when you're looking for something like that.
Well, I was say, on the other end of the spectrum, wasn't it Loch Ness where they tested?
Oh my gosh, you really want to get me fired up?
Well, yeah. But,
okay, I'll do this real quick.
Okay.
I did aquatic DNA testing. Loch Ness, so 2019, they did that stupid Loch Ness eDNA survey. Everybody at home, I don't give my hard opinion very often. It was stupid. They did so it would take us hours to do a sample. Hours. Wi-Fi. They did 36 samples in 2 or 3 hours, whatever the number. It was stupid. They did it. They literally filmed an otter while they were collecting the DNA sample. They were like, look, there's an otter. They had no otter hits. They had no sturgeon hits. So this whole comprehensive, we prove Nessie doesn't exist because the eDNA survey, they didn't get the animals that existed that they know were there, let alone they could see 30 feet from where they were taking the sample.
They might as well said they proved otters didn't exist.
They pulled water from a gas station.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. So there's that side of it. That's more of what happened there, in my opinion. I don't know this for a fact, is that the lab got a grant for it, and they sent one tech down to the boat ramp with a big cooler full of vials, and he just sat there and collected every sample. 36 samples would have taken us a month. It would have, because you got to go to these different areas and stuff like that for an actual, you got to go sometimes 8 miles away, 10 miles away, collect that sample, and you have to still get back to the lab to collect it. Let alone they did 36 samples in a day.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't do it.
So there's both ends of the spectrum of the eDNA, the problems with it. It's a great thing to have if you already have.
It's in its infancy.
Mm-hmm.
And eDNA is not this catch-all be-all thing right now. And it's very new. It will be a very amazing tool in my opinion, 10 or 20 years. Right now, it's either too sensitive or not sensitive enough. When you do, if you turn down kind of what it's looking for, it's just going to pass up on fragmented species. But they found a mammoth with it in Canada. They found a mammoth carcass in the permafrost that was just getting a little water trickling over it. And they had that on their sample pop up every year. And I'm like, we keep getting mammoth DNA hits. And they're so literally they had this team go out and I personally, I believe mammoths may still be around, but they were in this valley, and it's not very far from where people live. There's mammoths out there. We keep getting fresh DNA hits. Finally, they found it. It was the top of the skull, just would get water kind of run over it every year. So the DNA was in the river system, but it was just a frozen mammoth. That's why it was so fresh.
Interesting. I just put the link up for the Kickstarter. We've talked about it a couple of times for Legend Meet Science 2. If you're watching this live on YouTube, I don't know when the actual podcast part of this will air. The Kickstarter for the Legend Meet Science 2 has only got 4 days left, and they need your help. They're about $32,000. They're looking to raise $80,000 to get this thing off. So you can click that now if you're watching. Head over to Kickstarter Legend Meet Science 2. Give them a couple of bucks, and we're talking about DNA. They're going to do a ton of DNA testing, and that stuff is not cheap at all, especially some of the eDNA stuff. It costs a lot of money. So you can be a part of history, become an executive producer of Legend Meet Science 2. Go over and give them $5-10, whatever you can spare. It would be great to have. I know you guys have a project going on. I don't want to get out of here without talking about that. Don't you guys have a project going on right now? Talk a little bit about what that is, what you got going on, and how we can help out with that.
So yeah, we got a Kickstarter too. We're doing what's called Lawn Chair documentary series. So it's all about the weird and wonderful paranormal, but it's the whole kind of point is we're going to do the whole documentary series out of a lawn chair. The premise of that is that anybody can go to these areas, these type of areas. We're only going to do these ones that you can go to, that you can experience. I have a really bad knee. Me and my wife used to hike constantly. We'd go to these amazing places. I can't do that anymore. And like I said, I have a brother that has muscular dystrophy. So he can't get out, and do this kind of stuff anymore. So the whole point is that we're going to go to these areas, show you where they are, talk about the paranormal, weird and wonderful stuff that's happened, everything, Bigfoot, UFOs, giant catfish, but you can go there. You can, if you're handicapped, if you have problems, you can get there and still experience these places, because our buddy's actually in the other room. But he's done, dogman documentaries out in the middle of, Daniel Boone National Forest. I can't do that.
Right. You need Nephilim DNA to run through those woods.
Yeah. I can't go up, so that's kind of the point of this. And it's going to be fun. We're going to do it kind of like our podcast style, where we already got one sponsored. Literally, they're sending us, you remember the name?
Of the
Roberts?
I remember Robert.
It's polyfurniture.com. Polyoutdoorfurniture.com.
Yeah. And they're providing our lawn chairs.
Yeah, they got us big lawn chairs and a table and a little film. It's amazing. But yeah, so the Kickstarter is pretty much just to get the camera and the microphone. We can handle the rest from there. But that's just kind of the premise of it, is just we want to go to these lake monsters and stuff like that you can go to if you have problems. Because it's amazing to go out to Daniel Boone National Forest, but not all of us can go up. We can't get away from the road. But yeah.
Well, I think it's an awesome idea. You guys go over and check it out. I just put that in the chat. You can click on that, go over and give them a few bucks and help them pay for their equipment. That would be awesome. Everybody go check out Cryptids of the Corn. I know you guys have a YouTube channel. You can get it anywhere you get your podcast. You have some amazing interviews. You've got some amazing shows out there. Everybody should go check it out. Follow the show. Give them a listen. I think you'll really enjoy it. Jay, Justin, I've had a great time having you guys on the show, man. I'm glad that it worked out and we could get you on.
We thank you for having us on, and we look forward to having you on our show here soon.
Yeah.
We greatly appreciate you taking the time to have us on. We really do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Everybody in the chat, thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for tuning in live. If you're hearing this on the podcast part of it, everything that's in the chat now for these guys will be in the show notes. You can click on it, check it out. Cryptids of the Corn, Jay and Justin. I'm going to play this awesome outro. The rest of you guys have a great night, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
They say you don't gotta go home, but you can't stay here. And no, I don't wanna be alone in the world out there.
Part of just